Hello everyone, my name is Ashish and welcome to the X-Admin channel. So this is the continuation of my last session, and in the last session we have discussed regarding the interview questions on the topic of polymorphism. So there we have discussed like 14 important interview questions which are like about method overloading and also like about the polymorphism and the type of the polymorphism and regarding the compile time like polymorphism and also the polymorphism versus the inheritance. Yeah, so in this lecture we are going to discuss about the second type of like polymorphism, that is a runtime polymorphism. So before starting the lecture I will suggest you to watch this lecture till the end. And yeah, and also like if you have like not watched my like previous lecture on this, then I will suggest you to watch that also. And yeah, and also like subscribe this channel and also hit the like button. So let's move ahead with the next question about that you may get, that what is a runtime polymorphism. So runtime polymorphism is also called a dynamic polymorphism. So what is a dynamic polymorphism? So a polymorphism where a object is binding with a method happens at a runtime. So in a compile time, as we have discussed, the method binding was done at a compile time. But in runtime polymorphism, the method binding is done at a runtime. It means that the JVM decide that which method to be invoked at the runtime. So that type of like uh, that type of situation is called as a runtime polymorphism. So in runtime polymorphism, the behavior of a method is decided at a runtime. So JVM, that is Java Virtual Machine, binds the method call with a method definition or a body at a runtime and invokes the relevant method during a runtime. So when the method is called, this happens because the method are created at a runtime and the method is called using the object of the class. So basically in a runtime like polymorphism, the method are invoked through the object of a class. So the object of the class is resolved at the time at the runtime. So that's why it is called a runtime polymorphism or a dynamic polymorphism, right? So now let's move to the next question, which you may get, that how to achieve it or how to implement it, right? So in the same way we have seen how we can achieve or implement like compile time polymorphism. So now we are going to see how we can achieve or implement a dynamic polymorphism. So a dynamic or a runtime polymorphism can be achieved or implemented via method overriding, right? So compile time was achieved by method overloading, and a dynamic polymorphism can be achieved by method overriding. So in another way to implement polymorphism, and a common approach is when we have a is a relationship. So to achieve a dynamic polymorphism, inheritance concept should be there implemented in a class. Then only we can achieve a dynamic polymorphism or a runtime polymorphism, because we can achieve this by a method overriding, right? So that's why it is important that a method overriding should be there, and method overriding can be achieved by dynamic polymorphism in Java. So next question you may get, that what is method overriding in Java? So this is the important question. So if a subclass or a child class has the same method as declared in a parent class, then it is known as a method overriding in Java. Let's say that we have some method in a parent class, and in the subclass or a child class we have defined with the same method name, then that type of scenarios is known as, or a process is known as, a method overriding. So in other words, if a subclass provide a specific implementation of a method that has been declared already in one of the parent class, then this is called as a method overriding. So basically we are overriding. So overriding a word means that already there is something, we are like replacing that thing with something else. So that is word meaning like overriding. So you can like remember in the same way by knowing the meaning of this word, right? So overriding means right again putting something over there or replacing it. So method overriding means there is a method in a parent class, and again the same method you are writing in a subclass, but yeah, but with a different implementation. So that is method overriding. So the next question you may get, that what is the uses of method overriding? So method overriding is used to provide a specific implementation of a method which is already provided or which is already there in a superclass. So method overriding is used for runtime polymorphism. So what this means? This means that let's say that I have one method in a parent class and the implementation is already there. But now I want a new implementation in a subclass. Then this can be achieved by method overriding, right? So this is the use of a method overriding. That if you required a new implementation of a method which is already there in a parent class, so this is method overriding, and the method overriding can be achieved through inheritance, and this can be achieved in a different classes, right? So there should be a two classes present if we want to achieve a method overriding, because of course the inheritance should be there, or is a relation should be there to achieve a method overriding. So now let's move to the next question, the rule for Java method overriding. The first point is that method must have the same name as in a parent class. So the method should be the same name as the name in the parent class. Second point, the method must have the same parameter as in the parent class. So the parameter should also match. Only the condition is that the method should be in a parent class, and also the method should be in a child class. It means that both that method should be in a different classes. So then only we can achieve a method overriding. And the third point is that there must be easier relationship, or a inheritance concept should be used between that two classes. Then only method overriding is applicable, right? So these are the rules, and these are the very important rules which you have to keep in mind, and also you have to reply in the same way, like point to point, so that it will impress the interviewer. So the first point is that the method name should be same as in the parent class, means both the subclass and the parent class should have the same name of a method, and the parameter should be also be same, right? And there should be easy relationship, or a inheritance concept should be there between the two classes. Then only we can achieve method overriding, right? So next question you may get, can we override static method? If not, then why? So there can be an instance method in a parent class, and also there can be a static method in a parent class. So now the question comes, can we override a static method? So no, static method cannot be overridden, because once the static term comes, that it means that it is related to a class, not like related to a object. And for runtime, we know that the it depend on the object at the runtime. So when the static keyword comes, so you have to means yeah, so means the point should come in your mind that it is related to a class. So a static method cannot be overridden. The reason is that it is because the static method is bound with a class, whereas instance method is bound with an object. And static belongs to a class area, and the instance belong to a heap area, right? So for overriding, uh, because it follows a runtime, so in the runtime the binding of the method is decided by the compiler, or by the JVM. So that's why, and a static is bound to with a class, so that's why we cannot override a static method. So yeah, so the next question which you may get, that can we override a Java main method, or can we overload the main method? So as we know that we have a main method in a Java class, right? So the question comes, so this is the important question, that can we override a main method, or can we overload a main method? So as we know that main method is a static method, and just we come to know that we cannot override static method. So we cannot override a main method because the main is a static method. but we can overload a main method, because we can overload a static method, that is sure. So that's why we can overload a main method, but JVM will consider only the main method with a default argument, right, in which it has like array argument, right? So this is all about a main method. So we cannot override main method because it is a static method, and static belongs to a class area. So we know that the runtime polymorphism is depend on a object, and also we can overload a main method, right? So let's move to the next question is that difference between the method overloading and a method overriding. So this is the important questions. So the first point is that method overloading is used to increase the readability of a program. So we know that we are using a method overloading, right? So it increases the readability of a program. And this method overloading concept I have discussed in my previous session. So you can like visit that session also for the more info in the method overloading side. Now let's see method overriding. So method overriding is used to provide a specific implementation of a method that is already provided by its superclass, right? So as I have told that if we want us other implementation of a method which is already there in in a parent class or a base class, then we can go with a method overriding. So the second difference is that method overloading is performed within a class. So in a single class only, method overloading can be performed. But method overriding is occurred between the two classes. And also the inheritance should be implemented between the two classes. So this is the second point. Third point, in case of method overloading, parameter must be different. But in case of method overriding, parameter must be same, right? So all these points are discussed like already. So the fourth point is that method overloading is an example of compile time polymorphism, and method overriding is an example of runtime polymorphism, right? So the next point is that in Java, method overloading can't be performed by changing return type of a method only. So return type can be same or different in method overloading, but you must have to change the parameter. In Java, the method overloading cannot be performed by changing the return type of the method only, right? So return type can be same or different in method overloading, but you must have, sorry, that you must have change in the parameter. But in method overriding, the return type must be same or covariant in method overriding. So return type must be same or covariant. So what does this mean, covariant? Covariant means from a parent, means the access should go from lower to, means from like higher to lower, right? So this is covariant. So these are the some points of method overloading. Means these are the point for differentiating method overloading and method overriding. So the next question is like, what is binding in Java? So earlier we have like discussed the binding term. So now let's see what is the meaning of binding in Java and its type. So you may guess it, like you may get this question that what do you mean by binding? So the binding means the connecting or a linking between a method call and a method definition is called as binding in Java. So the connecting or a linking between a method call and a method definition. So there is some link between a method call and a method definition, right? So that linking is called as binding. So there can be a two type of binding. First, static, second, dynamic. Static is also called as early binding, and dynamic is called as late binding. So what do you mean by static binding? The binding that happens during a compilation is called as static binding, and this binding is resolved at a compile time by the compiler. So compiler resolve the method invoke or the method definition in a compile time. So that is early binding. And second point is dynamic binding or late binding. So the binding which occurs during runtime is called as dynamic binding in Java. So these binding is resolved based on the type of object at runtime, right? So this is also a binding, but this resolve at the runtime, right? So at the runtime, with the type of object, it is decided that which method should be called. So this is dynamic binding. Now let's move to the next question. How Java compiler perform static binding? So Java compiler just check which method is going to be called through a reference variable and method definition exists on it. So compiler check that that uh, that 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 method is called through which reference variable, right? It has a reference of parent class or it has a referent of a child class. So that is only checked in a static binding. It does not check the type of object to which a particular reference variable is pointing to it. So Java compiler checks that which method is going to be called through reference variable and the method definition exists on it. It is not going to check that which object is there in that reference, right? So this is the important point and the developers get confused that about the static binding. So you have to just keep in that the compiler is going to check only the reference. He's going to check that which reference is there, whether the reference of a parent class or a reference of a child class. It is not going to check that which object is there, the object of a parent class or object of a child class. So only the reference is going to check by the compiler. So in a static binding. So the next question you may get that how JVM perform dynamic binding in Java. So so in the dynamic binding, the actual object is used for binding at a runtime. So in the runtime, the JVM binds and decide that which method should be invoked. So JVM resolve the method call based on the type of object at a runtime. That that let's say that we have a reference variable. In that reference, which object is stored, whether the object of a parent class or a object of a child class. So that is decided by JVM at a runtime only. So these type of object cannot be determined by the compiler, right? So the JVM performs dynamic binding at a runtime based on the object, uh, that which object is contained in that reference, whether it is an object of a child class or it is an object of a parent class, right? So these are the some important questions which I have like discussed in the core Java interview questions in the topic of like polymorphism, right? So I hope that these points are clear to you in this both session of a polymorphism. So next, yeah. So in the next session, we are going to discuss about some more tricky and the most asked interview questions on the topic of abstraction, right? So thank you and have a nice day and see you in the next session of abstraction.